Today I am very pleased to welcome back to the studio Roy Snell. Roy is the co-founder and the former CEO of the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and the Healthcare Compliance Association, better known as the SCCE and HCCA. And today we are going to talk about Roy's new book, Integrity Works, Tools and Skills to Build Integrity. Roy, welcome back.
It's good to be here, sir.
Thank you. I really enjoyed our discussion on your last book, The Accidental Compliance Professional. So I am super excited to talk about Integrity Works. Now, normally I would spend some time detailing your experience and your background, but instead let's jump right into it. So how about telling us why you decided to write a book on integrity, especially so soon after your last publication?
I think the biggest reason is I've spent 25 years in the field of compliance and ethics, and I've seen the ethics part of our field discussed in general terms, little vaguer terms. I tried to make the topic a little bit more scientific, if you will. We'll talk some more about the specific examples later, but it was a desire of mine to try and it gives people tools and suggestions about how they can think about integrity and be more effective at integrity. And I got to tell you, it was a really interesting process. I thought I knew a lot by spending so much time in the profession. But after 18 months of study, I learned very quickly this is a lot tougher subject than I had anticipated, and I learned a lot along the way. It's been really interesting.
Okay, so let's make it more difficult. Okay, integrity. Let's start with the title of the book. Can you sum up integrity in a few words or sentences? And Roy, I'm not speaking here about a dictionary definition, but what should integrity mean to us, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I like focus. I like to have a target and focus very hard on that target. And I think two words that I like the most that are as closely related to integrity as any is truth and honesty. The dictionary definition is more along the lines of strict adherence to moral principles. What's really interesting, and in the course of 18 months, I've talked to a lot of people, and they go, well, I know what integrity is, and they go on to describe it in a way I've never heard before. And so it's just the definition alone has been an absolutely fascinating process to think through.
So for our compliance leaders that are with us today, what should integrity mean to them as compliance leaders?
Well, compliance and ethics programs have very clear elements to it. It essentially prevent, find, and fix ethical and regulatory problems. They're about looking for, finding, and fixing the problems, but it's also about prevention. And so what I would like to help with is the idea of providing a framework around the prevention. If you teach employees about some of the things I talk about in the book, I think it will help them think through decisions before they make them and will prevent problems before they happen.
So when we think about integrity, we're really thinking more about the prevention side of our compliance world, not necessarily our control side.
You know, it's everywhere. It's every moment of the day. It's all decisions. But that's the part I want to focus on is prevention and helping people sort through their decisions with a little bit more acumen.
Okay. Well, before we jump into the book is peppered with these Royisms. I've asked you the definition of integrity. What's a Royism, and do you have any favorites?
Well, ever since college, I happen to use phrases over and over and over again, and people have coined them in the last few years as Royisms. And when we went to write the book, my editor went and talked to some of the people who worked with me, and how can we draw some of this stuff out? And I said, well, make sure you use some Royisms. And basically they're about, 7 to 10 word statements that we highlight in the book, pull out from the sea of text and make it a little bit more interesting. And they're as clear a way of making a point as possible, making a point as simply as possible. One example would be is confirmation bias is the kryptonite of integrity.
Okay.
And so we pull those things out. There aren't that many in the book, but we have my editor, Karen Kenny, who's fantastic, has created a book that is not a sea of text. It's charts and lists and pull quotes and Royisms, and we do a couple interviews in there, and I think it makes the reading a little bit more interesting.
Oh, good. Well, I read the book, and here is the hard copy of it. So we'll talk a little bit more, and hopefully we're going to stumble on some Royisms during our interview.
Hopefully, maybe we'll create some.
Okay. So what I found interesting in your chapter on why integrity, and again, I found the whole book to be extremely engaging, but right from the start, you talk about situations that we all encounter, and where we could be speaking here professionally or personally, that challenge our integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't agree more. Roy, in life, personally and professionally, our values are going to get challenged. So for compliance leaders who are tasked with helping people in the field, right, to face risk in their work, do you think that's an important foundation of their compliance work, for them to affirmatively acknowledge that not all ethical decisions are easy? And I'm interested to hear if you think that's important, because some might say, what's to get tested? There's right or wrong.
Right.
So why are we struggling with this topic?
Well, therein lies a lot of the debate about what is right and what is wrong, and I am trying to help people come to that conclusion a little bit more scientifically, maybe. You don't have to look too far wandering around on the channels on television to see that we are in wild disagreement on a regular basis in this country over political and social and managerial and maybe even raising family issues about what is right and what is wrong. And I'm not, a lot of people spend time trying to tell people what is right and what is wrong. What I'm trying to do is tell people how to get to what they think is right and what is wrong, with, again, a little bit more scientific approach as opposed to psychological or philosophical approach. There's plenty of information about philosophical approaches to what is right and what is wrong. Well, what we don't have as much of is a little bit more practical approach to determining what is right and what is wrong.
But is it okay that the starting point, again, for a compliance leader that's sitting down with their commercial teams, is a good starting point to say it's okay to struggle, that our values are going to get tested?
Yeah, I think building awareness and the fact that there are reasons why we disagree on right and wrong, and then talk to them a little bit about the process to stepwise get to a determination of right and wrong.
So then to start down the path of deconflicting it.
Yeah, I think a tendency is really to become emotional or angry or frustrated or some other vague personal feeling, when we could spend a little bit more time, which we'll talk more about later, about gathering facts or talking to experts and these sorts of things, before we start to layer upon that our own personal opinion.
Okay. Well, let's rewind a little bit. In the book, you talk about the first time that your integrity was compromised. Mm-hmm. Now, Roy, you were 10 years old.
Yeah,
so tell us why that made it into the book, and And how can that experience, which was just a few years ago, help us now?
Right, right. So just to tell the story real quickly, is I and a friend of mine, a good guy, I imagine it might have been my idea. I can't imagine it was his. We were into building models at the time, and we went to the hobby store to steal some things, and I had some, just so embarrassing, I stuffed some paintbrushes up my sleeve, and I don't know what he took, but he got caught by an adult, and I did whatever what every 10-year-old little thief would do. Is I left the store. So I lacked integrity twice that day. I abandoned my friend in a time of need, and I stole some stuff, and he ended up being let go, but the guy kept him for a while just to scare the crud out of him, and it worked on me too. Now, here's my point. My point is that here it is 54 years later, and I'm still dwelling on it.
Okay.
I've dwelled
Why?
on it. Well, I think it's a part of improvement and gaining integrity. You have to look back and analyze your successes and failures. I saw some poker the other day. I don't play now, but I played for a while. I don't play much. I used to play quite a bit. And the whole game, you're making mistakes and great decisions. And what poker players just obsess over is the mistakes. And that's how you learn.
Right.
So I shared that story, and I think we all ought to think about our mistakes.
Right.
And figure out, how did I get there? What did I do? What could I have done differently? What will I do differently next time? If we just get that stuff out of our head and never think about it again, I mean, obviously it's going to be tough to learn.
That's a great point, because I think our memories can start to be self-serving historians if we're not careful.
All of us.
So let's talk a little bit about a quote that you had in the book that surprised me a little bit. It was from Barack Obama. And you and I have talked about, and we are in total agreement, that the politicizing of compliance hasn't been particularly helpful to civil debate.
Right.
And we're also going to talk about civil debate, so that's another chapter. But anyway, speaking apolitically, I was surprised to see the reference. So can you tell us a little bit?
I really appreciate this question. It was one of the few things that tortured me about the book is I put that in, and it's interesting because I might get canceled for putting in a quote from Barack Obama, who was making a statement about how the cancel culture is wrong. And I just felt that the words he used were very helpful to my point about civil debate is an important way to get to the truth. We'll talk more about that later. And so I put the quote in. Karen Kinney, who is the greatest editor in the history of planet Earth, fact checks everything a couple times, and she went back to fact check that, and it had been pulled from a video on a speech on a college campus, I believe, and she found another quote from him that marvelously described integrity, and it was kind of an interesting thing. I'm going to digress just a hair
Please.
here, but one of the other marvelous things that happened to me in the last year while I was writing this book is I'm in the process of retiring, soon to be in 40 days. I stepped down from being CEO about when I started this book. And so I'm at this point in my life where I really I don't think I need people's money anymore. I don't need their accolades. I don't need their praise. I don't really need as much stuff from other people, which is a conflict of interest, and it causes you to be not as genuine as you could be. And so I'm speaking, and people find this hard to believe that I could speak more frankly than I have in the past, but I speak more honestly and with less conflicts of interest and more truthfully,
Sure.
hopefully with more integrity. Well, I think when he stepped down as president, he was kind of relieved. He had reached the pinnacle.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there? You need no more praise. Money is probably not an issue. And he sat and reflected about the fact that he is now trying to align his values more with his actions and his statements.
Sure.
And I think sometimes when you're a politician, you have to say some things that the groupthink, or
Right.
the party says. You have to say, and now he doesn't have to do that so much. And here's the point. It's quite a revelation. It's quite a personal revelation. I wish I could go back to my younger self, my 25-year-old self, or people who are not quite as old as I am, and implore them to understand that if you can get there before you retire, life's going to be a whole heck of a lot better. Your integrity will be stronger. Needing things from other people is detrimental to integrity sometimes.
Well said. That's almost a Royism there.
I think we should break that down.
Okay. So let's talk about, we just shared how Barack Obama, impacted you. And so let's talk about how those around us can impact our integrity. In the book, there are a number of points where you talk about mentor-mentee relationships. And I read a recent article in the Harvard Business Review, and it talked about accountability partners. Those are people who we can reach out to, who can help us think about an issue in a way that maybe we're not looking at it, and people that are there that care about our success and our safety. So, Roy, should we all have an accountability partner?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's a great idea. Whoever thought of this, and the various forms of it may go back in history quite far, but it's a really important part of integrity. I'll take it a step further. We need accountability partners, not just a partner. We need accountability partners for various aspects of our life: family, social groups, work, maybe even politics. We tend to hang around people who think like us, and we end up with this groupthink. And groupthink is really a criminal act when it comes to integrity. It's one of the other things that harms integrity tremendously. And so I'll give you a practical example. When I was CEO for 17 or 18 years of an organization with a lot of people involved with it, I had to make a lot of the decisions that would affect a lot of the people in the course of the direction of the organization. And I'm pretty strong-willed and opinionated, smart enough to know that hopefully that I need help. And I would call people on the board who were subspecialists in a particular topic and say, I'm about to make this decision. Here are the options. Here's the information, the facts. Here's what I'm going to do. Am I okay? And I would try and call people who I knew would tell me when I was wrong, not somebody who would affirm what I'm about to say just because of our relationship. And so I would have them in finance, I would have them in program development, I would have them in administrative decisions, policy decisions for the organization. I'll tell you one specific example. I had an employee run into my office with a $75 check from the copier guy. The copier guy gave her a $75 check for looking at the copier. And she goes, I'm going to take everybody to lunch. And I said, give me a minute. And she went out, and I called our current president, Greg Warner, the Mayo Clinic, and I said, I'm about to implement a zero gift policy, not even a pencil. It's unusual, it is extreme, but I want to send a message. Am I okay? And he goes, yes. So I called her in, and I said, you got to give the check back. I'm going to take everybody out to lunch, after encountering this situation. But I think we all need accountability partners. They need to be honest, straight up, people who are willing to tell you what you need to hear, and they need to be subspecialists in the subject matter, not just another person with an opinion and no experience. Really important clarification there. I appreciate the question. If I ever write another book about this subject, that's going in.
Those are the folks that can say, you know what, we appreciate the solution, but there are workable alternatives that maybe you haven't been thinking about? Let's talk
happened
about
every
those.
time. Happened every time. They would say, put a little twist on it. You'll still get to where you want to go,
Right.
and you'll avoid this little pitfall. And I was just so grateful. You know, the organization has been extremely successful, and I get a lot of credit. And really, it's like cheating, because all of my accountability partners, every board member we ever had, every staff member, every member, every speaker like yourself would give me ideas and help make the organization a little better.
Terrific, Roy. Well, we're going to talk about things like groupthink and conformity and confirmation bias in our next segment. So we'll look forward to returning.
I look forward to it.
Thanks, Roy.